All right, Varun, we are good to go.
Hey, hey guys, welcome to Future Forward Sessions with upGrad and LBB. I'm Varun Duggirala. I'm the co-founder and content chief at the creative agency called The Glitch, and have a very interesting set of people with me today to talk about something that's very relevant to all of our lives. That when we're looking at the future, we're looking at how businesses are going to be moving ahead, how our leaders are going to look at that whole aspect of things. All of us who are different parts of the entire what do you call the landscape of business. I have a lot of questions to ask, and I thought I have two people here who had some conversations before this, and I think they have some interesting perspectives on where this entire space is going. On one end, we have Karthik Reddy. He's the co-founder and managing partner at Blume Ventures. Welcome, Karthik. Welcome to the chat today. And on the other side, we have Pallavi Singh, who's the marketing director at BMW for India. Hi, Pallavi.
Hello.
So yes, so as I promised you before we started off, I will try not to make this a panel discussion. This is more a conversation. I think people need to get a lot of insights from this. I have my iPad out with to take notes myself, because I'm going to take some of these pointers for myself. But to kind of kick things off, I thought it will be interesting to ask both of you. If you look at a time pre-COVID versus focusing on post-COVID, what are the trends that you, from your individual perspective, see which are getting accelerated and which are kind of looking at almost a slight downslide, and they might actually see a continued downslide going ahead? So I'll start with you, Pallavi.
So thanks, Varun, and hello to everybody who's joined in on a nice weather, Bombay, Delhi, everywhere. It's good weather. So I think interesting question. What's really changed is everybody was talking, especially from an automotive or consumer perspective. I would say in the luxury space, what has changed is that digital to commerce. So everybody was wanting to do anything in the digital and the automation space from a marketing point of view or a branding point of view. But now it's accelerated. There's no choice left. You've got to do it. There were brands who didn't want you to do it, and they were still taking time because it was more like a mindset shift than anything else. And I think that's happened. And second is you don't have a choice. So digital transaction has become very, very critical. It's still a long way to go, but I think that's one shift which brands have done over a period of time very fast.
Karthik, how about you?
Thanks for having us, Varun and Asta and the LBB and upGrad teams. So I think from our lens, it's not very different from what you've read in the popular press over the last 5-6 months. The press has obviously needed to cover, the optimistic side of this, pandemic and how things will improve for the better. As VCs, and I'm guessing I'm speaking to a lot of entrepreneurs on this in the audience as well, we are all eternal optimists, right? So broadly, we're trying to see the brighter side of things. And I was just on a call with someone, a journalist who called in from Hong Kong earlier today, and I've been saying this to everyone who's asking that, fundamentally, India's promised sort of growth and delivery hasn't come because of infrastructure and physical bottlenecks, right? So both our social and physical infra are sort of handicapped. It either requires a lot of money, a lot of structured actual execution. Not easy in a country which is not, where the infras, even the social infra, training infra, people infra is not keeping up with that demand. And so digital was in a very sort of idealistic way for most of us who are in this event. Digital, in my view, is actually the holy grail of actually getting to India's potential, right? Nothing can block people from accessing what they need to if they have the digital infrastructure. But for about 10 years, in my humble opinion, we were faking it. Actually, if this had happened, the pandemic had happened in 2015 or so, I think we would have been in deep trouble. Primarily, we would have been with 100 million devices, smartphones which are data connected, not 600 million. We would have been paying ridiculous rates. This call would have cost a bomb. we wouldn't have gotten onto a call. We wouldn't have had 120 people sign up. So this is as simple a reality as that. And I think you have to thank Mukesh Bhai for it. You have to thank, the government infra for it. But what's happened in the last 3-4 years, I think, has set us up for a phenomenal decade going forward. So we generally say we use tech to leapfrog 1 or 2 generations of falling behind China or the US. I think this is truly that opportunity to, leapfrog 3 or 4 sort of iterations of where we would have arrived at. Yeah. And I think it's forced all the actors in the environment to say that, hey, this is our only, lifeline in some sense, that, we drive our economy leveraging digital like we've never done before. And I think that's the massive opportunity. And there are businesses which are going to take systemic shocks in the short term. I think they will recover and come back to the reality. If you're in the travel business, there's nothing much you can do. I mean, it is the reality of the environment that will suppress some of those businesses for 2-3 years before they recover. And there will be consolidation in businesses like that, retail, fashion, travel of all kinds, all discretionary spending, right? Mm-hmm. And discretionary spending in this country, I don't know if you know this, I heard Nandan Nilekani say it just a week ago. He said 90% of India's discretionary income is with the first 100 million Indians, right? Mm-hmm. And that's our reality. Everybody else earns money, but just about to keep their basic stuff going, right? Roti, kapda, makan, education, healthcare, financial services. And that's what and the mobile phone, of course, which pieces all this together. You ask them to spend on something more, it's tough. And so I think industries which are built on discretionary spending will have a challenge. Anything which is essentials, and people say essentials is dal chawal. It's not. It's essentials is even financial services, payments, education, as you're seeing this time around. I think all of those are fundamental to a household. All of those, I think, are just going to dramatically shift. 4-5 year shifts in terms of adoption in favor of digital from traditional offline models. I think the quota model, for example, will die, right? And get reborn in a digital avatar and things like that. So just that's my high level points.
Yeah, just to kind of take it from there, right? And one of the aspects you spoke about is how we've had a lot of physical restrictions for a bunch of things to kind of scale up, and obviously digital becoming almost the backbone of how we do things has really been able to accelerate that. Pallavi, I want to actually ask you, saying for businesses like yours, which also have a very large, obviously, physical element, there's an entire conversation around what is called phygital, and how that model has kind of evolved. So from your perspective, how and from what you've been doing at BMW, etc., how is that kind of been looked at, and how do you see that part of it playing out? Because digital's now become such a large part of it, primarily because of how we've learned to use it. How do you see that evolution panning out?
I think even if you look at pre-COVID, right, digital is not something which is a new baby in the town. It's something like, I think what Karthik also said, it's accelerated and a lot of brands have to accept it and move on and change it. But pre-COVID as well, the entire value chain, if you look at, typically from search to then owning a product, was always done online. You search, you find, you compare. There's so many aggregator platforms you'll go, and then you make a decision. Of course, a product which is more in the luxury space, a lot depends on word of mouth, which is, your friends, your families, or your colleagues, or so many other things, right? So all of that, 90% of your journey was still digital, right? It's the last value chain, which is the experience. We're still, our country is still dependent on your wife agreeing, or your girlfriend agreeing, or your kids agreeing to the color or the configuration you want in the car. And that last mile of delivery of your vehicle matters the most. Yeah. Right? I think that still is going to take time, and I keep telling my team, and I keep talking to a lot of folks, even in the media, is that there's going to be a dramatic shift which is going to happen. That there was a time when you were speaking, talking to somebody like a founder or a venture capitalist somewhere in New York or Silicon Valley, like, oh, I got one this call, and maybe it's going to crack. But that's going to become very normal. That's going to be a new normal. But the exclusive experiences, people getting together, is going to be something which people will long for. So it's a paradigm shift which is going to happen in a lot of ways. And I think the last mile is still going to be an experience of picking up, because it's a manifestation, right? Its product is a manifestation of something you're owning. So it's still very ambiguous, I would say. I think next year middle, we will have a lot of clarity on how people will behave, because as a community, as a cultural context, if you look at India, right, we're still a society of people getting together, knowing each other, little intrusive in people's life as well. So I think that's going to take time for us to become very how the European markets are, or the States or the Americas are. So the last mile is still very experiential, but the 90% was still pre-COVID the same. I think post-COVID is commerce. So transaction is something which people were not able to do. A lot of them, like especially for us, we were already ready with digital platforms, right? You could pick up the card, you could transact online. And that's something which people are now getting used to it. And especially a product which is more expensive does take time. So I think nothing much has changed. It's just the adaptability of the medium which people have to now gun for. You never thought your, even our grandparents picking up and saying, I'm now, getting some stuff from Amazon or maybe Grofers. We never thought about it, right? But that's happening. So I think that's the big shift. When this value chain and this value chain is going to come together, that's when India really is going to change.
And how does that affect how marketing functions, right? And just as a follow-up to what you just said, how are you seeing what you were doing in terms of just as a marketing function around the product? How are you seeing stuff which you are focusing on a lot more? I mean, commerce is something you mentioned, right? I mean, the fact that we would transact and we would purchase what were generally products which you could come in a box. Whereas now, when you're talking about products which definitely can't, I mean, that will be a very large box if you have to get it. But but how is your outlook in terms of what areas really are for you the future in the marketing space on that front?
So, so if you look at the 70s and the 80s, we used to have the 4 Ps, right? We all learned in the B schools, and a lot of us, 4 Ps of place, price, promotion. And then came the 2010 and the 2000s, where we said, now it's in some ways, it's the 4 Cs, which is content, communication, consideration, and in some ways context, right? And I think I personally feel marketers of today have to change a lot. Because we need to understand it's the 4 I's now, because of the intel, the insight, the inspiration, and the impact. Because marketing today is about return on investment in a lot of ways. And I think I'm so glad, because of digitalization, marketing automation has really made marketers the front leaders for business. The amount of information we have about the consumer, of course, with the consent of the consumer and the data privacy laws under that, we can give customer whatever they need as a click of a button, which never existed, right? We know our customer, we know their preferences, we know when, how, where, what they would want, so that we don't bother the consumer. That's what the value chain is all about. I think that's the centerpiece of marketing now. How can we ensure that the inquiry to the retail, actually you can track the consumer funnel and give what the consumer needs at their point of view, from their perspective. So really understand, I think that's the automation piece, which is really going to help marketers going forward. And I think the marketers of today, I think we all love the debonair, but we also love databases. So I think the database aspect of really leveraging your existing database, ensuring all the systems talk to each other, and then having one clear picture of your customer journey end to end, from in search to in store to in use, is something which is a different ball game for marketers in the post-COVID era now.
Karthik, I want to continue to ask you that you obviously do have insight into a lot of the startups that are around it. Startups have grown across the market, have kind of surfed that wave of this is the opportunity, let's move towards it, and this is a way to kind of evolve. So they were going with the changes, but obviously this is a drastic change that has happened. How are you seeing which parts and how have some evolved, how have some kind of adapted to this, and just from a broad strokes point of view, maybe from a B2C perspective can kick off, maybe then we'll get to a B2B in terms of that, and how is that kind of,
Sure. So I think on the consumer side, there are sort of 3 buckets or 3 camps of kind of companies, right? Ones which had, so if you draw the 2x2 in some sense, because it helps us frame every problem, the 2x2 would look like how much capital you had in the bank, right? To even take advantage of these opportunities, you need the money. and then whether you're in a tailwind sector or a headwind sector, right? And just to clarify that for the most of the audience, tailwind would be online education, it would be gaming, it would be entertainment, headwind, as we've discussed, travel, offline retail, and things like that, or for that matter, real estate, and anything which is automobile went through a phase, it's recovering smartly, but all of these went through a massive dip. And also, I think these are fundamentally the audience, as we've been discussing for the last 20 minutes, audience is changing because this is not a 10-day or 20-day shock, right? This is like a slow, prolonged sort of seeping of, what your life in a parallel universe could look like, right? So people are contemplating, how they want to work. Do they work from home? Do they change their job profiles? Do they change, And so fundamentally, as Pallavi rightly said, how it will play out is actually still 18, 24 months away in totality, right? What you're seeing is more reactionary at this point, right? People are adapting to day-to-day changes on lockdowns and unlockdowns and travel restrictions and whatnot. But how they will change their lives per se is going to take a year or 2 or 3, right?
Yeah.
But some things which were destined to move in that direction. For example, can you democratize, education and healthcare of the highest quality in a country which is as complex as India? No chance. Yeah. You'll say, no, I'll speak to Prime Minister Modi and get this done. Some other scheme. Ain't happening. Market forces will not let that happen for another decade, right? So you can sit in between as a digital player and say that fundamentally I can change how the service is delivered altogether. Education is a great example of that, right? It's teaching at the end of the day. I mean, of course, looking at a screen for 6 hours for a 12-year-old in my house is difficult. But the reality is, if they get tuned to it, after a year, they'll say, it's fine. I'll just hang out with my friends and after school and then figure out school online, right? So, so fundamental shifts of this nature are difficult to predict. But I think directionally, the good part of it is the companies which were in the right quadrant, tailwinds plus a lot of cash in the bank, they're rocking it. Because then they're able to hire. You need good talent to roll out new products. You're able to raise more money because your performance is ahead of your peers who don't have as much money or haven't taken advantage of it. Yeah. And it's a nice, virtuous, fulfilling, self-fulfilling cycle, which suddenly makes you the leader. A great example in our portfolio is an academy, for example, which is quadrupled revenue in 6 months. Quadrupled, right? And the recent acquisition of White Hat Junior is another example. We had seen that company 2 years ago and passed on it thinking, hey, coding is going to take a long time to become mainstream. It became mainstream in 4 months, right? And if you were equipped to take advantage of it, you can. Suppose you were in the same position, didn't have money, then it's a little tougher, but people are trying. For example, right now with the Chinese ban, which is a very tactical opportunity, a lot of people are rushing in, whether it's Facebook with their own app, or whether it's Glance and Daily Hunt and ShareChat with their own app, or new guys saying, no, these guys, old guys don't know how to do it. It's not their core business. We'll take a stand. And there's enough risk capital saying, inshallah, this might become, TikTok. So let's throw $5 million at it, and some $1 billion. So the trade-offs are very high, and that's what venture capitalists look for. So I think there are these, the 5 to 6 months offered these kind of opportunities. If you didn't fall into that bucket, then you got to be either conservative in how you spend, because it's very important to survive. So we had a series internally called Catch 21. There's 21 months of survival. So you were in April 1st. How do you see, sunlight on Jan 1st, 2022 as a company that's alive and thriving, right? So it becomes important to sustain yourself to live and fight another day. Because essentially we're all talking about how do you build a business that can win, right? It's not about individual sort of preferences. As entrepreneurs or the capitalists who back those entrepreneurs, you want the companies to last and win. And then if you're in the bottom quadrant, which is headwinds and no money, reality is you just have to make the best of the situation and find a home. And at least half a dozen companies in my portfolio of the 70, 80 are discussing how to find that home. Or in the 3 or 4 cases, if they were already struggling for 3-4 years, this was like the straw that broke the camel's back. So they've all kind of said, okay, I've had enough. I've tried my best. I don't think I can survive 2 more years this way, right? And so it's a wide spectrum. There's no easy answer always. And that's the fun, the pain, the joy of startups, right? And we are kind of fortunate because we have a portfolio risked But if you're one of those startups in one of those buckets,
Yeah.
you're either having exhilaration or you're having deep pain.
Just taking from that point, Pallavi, as a leader in an organization during times like these, and I want to ask Pallavi this first, and I want to come to you, Karthik, from a broader sense of the word. So, Pallavi, how do you see? What do you see as the role of leaders kind of changing? I mean, I know there's some stuff which is always on, but how have you seen that evolution for you working with your team, working with people across, I would say, different verticals within the company? How has that role kind of changed or evolved?
Yeah, I think, I just say personally, it's been a roller coaster ride, I have to admit. I think this is something which was, nobody expected something like this in our century to come, right? So initially, I think the initial days of lockdown, and I've personally never worked from home, right? So it was, oh my God, you can, stay at home. And when you have a husband who also has his own business, who's always busy, and you perpetually never saw each other. So it was exciting, and you could just have lunch together and then find time. So that's a personal space, right?
Yeah.
Professionally, I think the nature of job we are in, especially marketing, branding, communication, or even for that matter, digital, you need to sit together, need to think. There are creative juices which need to flow, and you need to contradict, you need to fight sometimes and say, I don't agree, we agree. I think that was something which the virtual space cannot do. It is the limitation of the nature of the platform. I think that's something which then we thought we should divide into different teams, have different leaders, different people, not your own leader to do it, but get different people from different teams to get that energy flowing, right? But I think what we realized and I personally realized that oversteering is never good. We as leaders want to ensure that we are talking to our teams and they're feeling okay. Maybe they don't need that steering. And over a period of time, I think when this journey is longer, it's not going to end so fast. So it's giving space. I think what I realized was giving space to your team. And really, if they need help, they will all come for help. Sometimes we try and extend too much help, which maybe people don't require. So I think really having empathy, but also having that intel and insight to ensure when to act and how to act and at what time to act. I think that's something this personally for me has been a great leadership lesson, I think. But also understanding that your teams really need space sometimes, personally. That's been a journey overall, but I think now that journey has to end, I guess, and we all have to go back and really it's also frustrating at times, just sitting with the, your work hours have extended. They have extended. And I guess over a period of time, we've all realized, and I personally have realized that you have to switch off. Otherwise you have that temptation of, because laptop is open, right? You can still do much more work. But I guess that's another piece of really having discipline to really, I kind of put buckets between myself and my team, that let's really have buckets of, on a Friday, you still need to toast. If you've achieved your sale numbers, let's toast, it's okay. Even if it's virtual, we got to do it. So I think those are things which over a period of time you kind of learned, which we never did before. So that's what I would say from my perspective.
Karthik, take from what Pallavi said, in your conversations across all the founders, not just across your portfolio, but in general who you're speaking with, what have you seen? Sorry, I realize you're on mute for a second. I know I come from an agency called The Glitch. We sometimes have technical glitches here.
Yeah, sorry. No, I think when I unmute, you have to allow me to come back. Yeah, sorry.
I don't have those powers, so I'm not even going to say that. I'm taking from what Pallavi was saying, right? When you're in conversation with founders across startups and across not just your portfolio in general, and even you as leader, what are you looking at across those teams, saying, okay, at times like these, this is what is making X and Y work, and I know for a fact that this is what's going to make this startup go ahead. Not just the quadrant, like you mentioned, they're a part of, but also just in terms of the leadership and what they're focusing on.
So I think, when you've run through 100 plus startups, you've seen every flavor. So I don't think it's as formulaic as people imagine. In fact, there was one question on the Q&A which kind of also suggested, what should I focus on? And I think every founder or every cohort of founders have different strengths, right? You can't be what your innate strength is not and what the other person's is. In fact, which is why, by the way, we advocate the idea of a very strong founding team as opposed to a founder per se. It's very difficult to inject. So I'd actually made a note which is appropriate for this question, which is, I think the ability, great founders and great leaders have the ability, especially on early stage startups. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in large corporates, right? Though I worked there, I didn't get to that level where I had to worry about this that much, right? But in early stage startups, I see that you're primarily the founding team and the leaders are keepers of the mission, right? And the values and the culture, right? And if you've not sort of figured that out early on why people come to work for you, all you're going to offer is a job and you're going to be outbeaten very quickly, right? Because there's always an Amazon or a Flipkart which can offer a better paying job than you can ever offer. So if you have a priority set in a descending order, it would almost be, actually think about a company that's getting formed, or even in the first 5 years of its life. Most of your audience is probably in that bucket, right? So I would say mission, culture, vision, then strategy, then ops and processes, and then tactics, right? So the way I mapped it out as I was thinking about one of the questions you asked me, this is the pace at which, in descending order, things should change in your firm, right? If the leaders don't practice this, and therefore you should hire also in that same order. If you've not sold mission, it doesn't matter how good a programmer that person is, right? Because for them, you're not going to excite them by, hey, the different code. You're writing it because you're chasing a purpose of solving something for this customer, right? You're solving a certain deep financial, services problem. You're solving an education problem. If they don't feel that, then you've lost half your troops even before the battle has begun. And these are very tough, very long battles, right? And you want people to stick around for 4 or 5 years at the minimum to really impactfully change the direction of the firm. And this is not the first, of course, it matters to the first 10 people, but it doesn't stop at the first 10. It goes to the next 50, next 100. And I think in some cases today, even without the founders, and I've said this, so the punchline on this last year was great founders, great outlast, outlast the investors, right? So it doesn't matter whether the VCs are around or not. And great companies outlast their founders as well. So you build such a strong foundation that the founder can go after the 10th year and say, I've retired, and the company will still run. Flipkart's a good example, right? It's not easy to have a $20 billion company running on itself. Obviously, they did something right in the first 5 years. And I think that's what true leadership is, in instilling those values and culture, not thinking of it as, hey, this is a JD and this is a KRA and I will hire for that and somehow piece all this together. And then, of course, I agree with all of what Pallavi said about, specifically in COVID, it's about figuring out an online hack of keeping that same momentum going in empathy and relationship, even though you can't meet. And that's not been easy, but you have to, everyone's adapted to that. At least all the good leaders have.
There's actually a question I wanted to actually ask both of you. And there's always been this question about generalists versus specialists in terms of just, if you look at the broad stroke, people want to focus on certain professions. I've personally always been of the opinion that it's great to be a generalist and have a little bit understanding on specializing some things, but I know that it differs from person to person. If you had to look at present scenario and kind of looking forward, and I'm going to go to each of you for this, is that what do you think are great areas for someone who's entering the world which we are inhabiting and going ahead? I mean, once we don't have to just be in our homes, but get out a little bit. What do you see as clear areas where someone should really focus on to specialize, and where that holds a lot of opportunity for them? Pallavi, I'll come to you first, and I'll come to Karthik right after that.
I think pre-COVID, there were certain set areas people were wanting to go. I think post-COVID and the way our education, I'll go back a little, our education system has really changed over past 10 years. I think even if you look at universities or you look at um, schools or even, your high school, the education system has really changed and there are people who want to make now, whether they want to go into, forming a startup or they want to go into a special like a marketing branding or maybe a lot of them going into sales or engineers or doctors. There were certain set norms you wanted to do, right? I think if you look at now, and I was talking to a lot of people during this phase, it's become very personal. A lot of people are now thinking healthcare is something I really want to contribute. Human rights is something I really want to look at. I think it's very personal. I cannot answer on people's behalf. It is really dependent on, there are people who want to work for their country. There are people who want to just work for themselves and want to make a lot of money. There are people who want to have a very consistent life and retire over a period of time and have like a nice, retired life. So I think it depends if you want to live, and everybody's circumstances are very different and it's very personal to everybody.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, and I think there are two things which are very emerging and next 10 to 20 years, if people in the analytics side of the business and in the intel side or the insight when I say really understanding the consumer, less organization but more consumer, and how consumer life cycle was changing in 6 months, past 5 years. Now it's changing every month almost because people are changing very fast. Their preferences are changing. The way they looked at life has changed. So I think analytics is one part where people have to be very strong. And if you really want to continue working, you have to be very sharp on getting those aspects. And I think second piece, I would really say, one can take a punt on doing something on your own now. There are a lot of opportunities, and people are wanting, that kind of evangelism in people who would want to do something different. But I think insight on data space and data science. I think data analytics and data science. These are three spaces which are going to explode. And people who understand how those three components can work for the best for the organization, but more importantly for the consumer, because we often forget that the consumer consumes everything, not just your own organization, right? So I think that's the space I personally feel is going to be the space of the future.
Karthik, how about you?
So I think we all we either grow up with some innate talent and interests or personalities and traits. So somewhere around the early teens to mid-teens, I think broadly, like your personality traits are kind of done, right? Both nurture, nature, both have played out their parts, and by 15, 16, you figure what you're good at from that perspective. So if you're lucky enough to know that you're really good at something and you're that kind of a persona, the good news is I think education and career choices are getting even more democratized than ever before, right? Yeah. And doubly so now in a post-COVID world, which means you can actually test your coding skills, you can test your chess skills, you can test your dancing skills, right? You can become a dance instructor, which otherwise you would have said, no, it's not worth the money unless I reach the top of the pinnacle. So today the pyramids are becoming deeper. It's just not the top of the pyramid in a lot of professions where we are not able to earn enough money to keep your keep, right? And so a fantastic yoga instructor sitting in Ahmedabad and teaching, and that's actually who I learned from in the mornings. And this was a girl who used to be here in Bombay. She got married, moved there, and now she runs my morning classes with the wife, right? And so I'm saying this kind of, and that's her passion, by the way. You just see she's actually doing higher studies in it. So I think I'm a huge fan of specialization if you know your calling, right? Because I think it gives you enormous freedom, like what Pallavi said. It gets thinner and thinner as you're more passionate about a particular space. The income opportunities for the first time are like much wider and much larger, much more remunerative than ever before. If you said somebody has to be a physical instructor 15 years ago, there was hardly any money. Today you can be a rock star, right? You can have a YouTube channel, you can build a brand. And so I think the second is to go down the specialized path and you want to become a micro entrepreneur, as Pallavi suggests, then there's no shying away from, nahi, main video nahi banaunga, right? I'm shy. No, I think that era is over too. If you're not visually able to communicate anymore. There is no, writing is limited, right? Speech is limited. You have to almost be a video personality to be a rock star. And that's even in our jobs, right? If you're going to sit in a 8-person, 10-person Zoom meeting and you can't communicate, you're in trouble. So class participation, which was thought as a privilege of the few, is now a democratic principle. Everybody needs to start expressing their voice. The generalists, I think, is tough. I'm a generalist. I did like a bit of everything, right? And it somehow oddly helps in a profession like venture capital. And but you have it tougher because you can get dated very quickly. And I know most of the audience probably is in their 20s and they still have time to plan this out. But I think by your mid-30s, if you're a generalist, you need to figure out how to specialize in some sense or find a direction in which you can spend the next 20, 25 years. Otherwise, you're in big trouble. You'll be suddenly found redundant or, dated by the time you turn 40. So I think that window to sort of specialize, if you haven't figured it out by education, by calling, that I want to be a doctor, I want to be a designer, toolmaker, musician, whatever. If you're not able to figure that out by your early 20s and you take a career path which leads you there, you'll be very frustrated if you don't find that final calling by your early to mid 30s is my take. And I don't know what yours is, Varun, but that's been my learning. And that's what I see in most of the people I've observed as well, both as founders and team members of these founders.
I'm an eternal generalist because I still haven't found, I do everything. So I would say that I'm this, I think I go broader in my generalizations and hopefully find a few things here and there I can mildly specialize in is how I've always done it. But what I also find interesting at the time we're at is that people are finally beginning to explore things which, like you said, which they didn't know they could actually do, couldn't actually go into and really and say, okay, this is something I can do as well. This is something I can do as well. Do you feel that the way we're working right now, and Pallavi, I want to actually ask you this, is that especially with the way you're working with your team, are you seeing that your team is, let's say, exploring things beyond what they would normally do? Is that helping them do? So it's almost like, is the way we're working now almost adding to the way our minds are almost opening up to how we look at our day jobs, if that's the word to use?
So, like I say, every person is different. So there would be people who are overtly ambitious and, who would take out time that, my travel time is saved. So let me do something in the space of digital or data and learn something. A lot of team members I've seen are trying to learn, attend webinars or do certification and specialize in some aspect of digitalization, right? So that they don't feel I'm dated in any ways, like Karthik was saying. And I think the second, there are some people and there are people who are okay with what they're doing, right? And they're fine with whatever they have in this space. So I think it depends on the people. And the shift I'm seeing is that some people are also feeling that life is very short. And, there's one life, live it today. So let me take that risk and do something new. Let me find out ways, or some people are feeling, let me spend more time with family. So like I said, it's very personal. What I'm generally seeing that people are changing a lot. Yeah, there are certain people who are evolving much faster and understanding that bonding with family is very important or taking care of your parents are very important. There are other set of people, and I'm trying to give a general statement here, but I'm not talking about different set of people. But there's different set of people who are looking at, this is the best time. I am saving time on travel. I'm saving time on not going out and not doing anything which I would do. So why not do more certification? Why not really mentorship has become very big, which I am personally doing, actually, to be honest, really talking to people I think I can learn from in this time, which I was not able to do because of your meetings and because of your travel time. Meetings are forever meetings, right? So now you have that time to get mentored. I think that's something which, like even Karthik was saying, and there's so many people on the panel as well who'll be in their early 20s or early 30s, is I think really finding a right mentor and really nurturing yourself through that journey is really critical, because that goes a long way in my view. And mentors could be in different facets, right? In different fields you could find, and then find your calling, that this is something which I could really learn from this person. And I think that goes a long way. Reading, doing certifications and all are a great thing to do because that makes your foundation and fundamental very strong. But real life experiences, when you really slogged your, work a lot and, pulled up your sleeves and really done dirty work, then you really understand what it takes to do stuff you do. So I think that's what I've seen people doing, learning lessons, training, and really mentorship to know what my calling could be. I think that is what I would kind of close down on.
Karthik, how do you see the venture industry by itself evolving with this way the entire business world is kind of moving? Do you see shifts there in terms of just the industry as a whole, and just like if someone who wants a career in ventures right now, is there some way they need to kind of tweak their mindset?
Venture, unfortunately for most people who aspire for it, I guess I got lucky at one level in terms of timing, right? 10 years ago, early to that market. It's a cottage industry at the end of the day, right? It's not an industry that employs more than 500 people or something like that in the whole country. So it's very specialized industry. To me, venture as an industry will grow on the back of success, which we have seen on paper valuations and paper wealth creation, but we have not seen cash returns yet. And I think it is very critical 2-3 years ahead of us in the startup market, where companies need to show profitability, need to exit via IPOs, etc., and show that India can make a boatload of money. So we've gotten lucky with a few exits like Walmart, Flipkart, but like not too many of those. So there's a little bit of not a question mark, but there is like, hey, you need to show this. This is how the venture industry works. So that's from the financing side. From the startup side, it's definitely creating more poster children, role models for entrepreneurs who don't come from conventional entrepreneurial backgrounds, which is fantastic. And that's women, that's small town kids, that's someone in Chennai who will see Girish of Freshworks as a role model, someone in who went to a particular college which is not in IIT or an IIM, but saw the alma mater become a rock star. So these role models are coming out by the dozens, and so that inspires a lot of entrepreneurship, so to speak. And so I think that's a fantastic outcome of the acceleration that you will see in venture, right? And the third, when you said how will the job change, I think jobs, therefore, if you're trying to make a mark in an industry like venture, it's not there's almost a playbook now, and there's a lot of memes joking about this as well, that a lot of the younger sort of new brands in venture, like a guy who started up a small fund of $1 million, let's say, how did they create that? They were either part of an accelerator or an incubator where they took a job for 2-3 years, or they started a podcast and they said, hey Varun, you seem like an interesting guy. Hey Pallavi, I'd like to talk to you, even without COVID's impact.
I'm taking notes right now on that.
And started making. So the 3-4 things you achieve: you build network, you become a brand in your own right because you're bringing something to the masses. You're a small media brand yourself. You learn a lot from the people you're talking to, and you actually know whether you're good at it, because half the job in a sort of a long-term investing business like ours is about asking the right questions of yourself, of the entrepreneur, of the world in general, because you're trying to forecast where the world is going, right? And so you need to train your mind to be oriented in that fashion, and that's venture, right? And so anyone who's thinking about it right now needs to figure out how to break in through whatever means. And thanks to Twitter, thanks to podcasts today, if you're a street fighter, you can go and get yourself in front of enough interesting people. You'll create enough content that people get to know you. And there's some 50 different varieties of podcasts today in early stage venture, which didn't exist 5 years ago. And Twitter has become kind of a platform where LinkedIn and Twitter have become platforms where people can advertise their skills and their knowledge of the sector. And even in the west coast of the US, this is how the new ones are proliferating. Otherwise, it's a very concentrated industry where outsiders find it difficult to get in. So you'll have to break in somehow.
what Karthik's mentioning about just generally advertising yourself and kind of putting it out there and all that stuff. One of the questions that kind of came in from one of the viewers is actually that what do you see as the future of advertising, right? Pallavi, I know you and I had a brief chat about this when we were having a pre-chat, but I'd love to hear from you in terms of not just about what's happening because of now, but some of those things that have been happening over time, and what do you see as broad strokes trends that are going to be the future of the entire marketing and advertising space in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did talk about the marketing space, how it's evolved and it's changed over a period of time. But I think from an advertising perspective, I mean, there was a time we depended. There was first party approach, doing print, doing TV. I think that doesn't exist anymore, right? And even from a creative point of view, creative agencies or media agencies, I think there are agencies who are finding that how do you craft the customer journey end to end, right? There is no way you can make a KV, which is your key visual, and then adapt it to the entire customer journey. It's not going to happen anymore. So I think from an advertising point of view, there has to be a clear amalgamation of understanding customer personas and understanding how each persona works through the entire value chain of the customer's life, which means the way the creative agencies of the big agencies set up have to dramatically change. And I see this day in, day out, because it is a big hurdle when you have to send out a communication out. Now, digital doesn't work as mainline doesn't work as digital. And from a return on investment point, every dollar you spend today has to be measured. And if you can't measure, then you don't spend. And I think I'm a big believer of, if you can't measure, don't spend. Because every dollar which goes out, if it's not doing anything for your business or for your consumer, then how are you justifying the cost and your bottom line of your business? So I think that's where agencies have to really understand that it's not about those beautiful ads. It's about how are you impacting the business? How are you ensuring that the business is going to survive for next 5 years? Mid to short-term goals. Also, the businesses have to share those goals with agencies, and that's how advertising will change. Advertising from the past has been, and I think before COVID has also been, this is the campaign. We are obsessed, advertisers and marketers and myself, I think, we are obsessed with campaign planning. This is new product, this is new campaign, boom, let's go. I think that's changed. It's not about one campaign planning, it's planning about your business impact throughout the year and how you impact customers' life throughout the journey with your external business partners who are your agencies. They have to own that piece of your business, and we have to own their share of them making profits by the end of the day. It's both chains working together. I think that's the shift. Marketers, advertisers, our mindset shift as businesses, that everything you spend has to be measured. And secondly, advertisers and agencies and now publishers. There's so many single platforms and publishers, and I think our dependency on technology platforms are much more than advertising agencies today, right? So if you look at today, you look at the SAPs, or you look at the Adobes, or you look at even normal new tech companies coming in, are able to give us and amplify our information about customer, or our offers, or tactical to larger brand campaigns, leading to business is much more valuable today. That absolutely doesn't mean that you don't need to create aura for whatever you do. But the percentage has to be dependent on how much money are you spending by the end of the day to impact the business. I think that's the shift.
Another question that came in, and Karthik, that was focused towards you, was that during the pandemic, a lot of operating procedures, right, and business practices have changed, right? So what have you seen startups do, especially if they want to start something right now? What do you think is feasible for them right now? If you want to start a business in the middle of a pandemic, what do you think is almost take away operating procedures from before, and what do you see as things going ahead?
It's a tough question. I mean, I think I've struggled. I don't have a good answer for it, to be very honest. Primarily, it's been also my struggle of sort of rationalizing whether I would back new founders or new ideas which were built during the pandemic months, right? This is super difficult to, I don't think human beings are sort of engineered to build great, long-lasting businesses by never seeing each other, right? It's like saying, hey, we met, let's get married also. And then we'll live like this until we can actually meet. And then I know we'll have a great marriage after that. It's no different, right? At a fundamental level. It's not about just putting SOPs into place. Building brand new businesses, which are long lasting businesses, super challenging in this environment. My advice would be just take a step back and do what you're doing, or plan for how you might launch. But take advantage of the environment when it opens up. There's too much risk already, a macro risk. Why introduce other elements of risk that you can't control? So that's my broader take. That said, people, in fact, I got an update from, he's an ex-founder of ours from Fund 1. We're cutting a check into him in Fund 3. And he's couldn't move back to India. He's outside. And he's trying to manage this startup build out. And that's from a seasoned entrepreneur who knows how to who had the core team in place. And he wrote us the update. We haven't cut the check yet, but he wrote us a business update. His biggest problem is actually managing his organization and processes. And this is with someone who has that level of experience. So I think it's super tough for someone young to sort of kickstart without having the semblance of office touch and feel.
There's another question which almost feels like a follow-up question to this, which is basically saying, how do you keep investor confidence during times like these? It just almost feels like a follow-up. I feel like the same person wrote both questions, but it's literally taking from that and saying, how do you keep confidence?
No, existing business. Hopefully, you've built enough comfort and trust with at least the mainline management, the founders and the core team. We've been emphasizing that the only way you can win over that confidence and keep the trust going is by over communicating. There are some people who don't agree with me, but my school of thought says we should over communicate. So the most number of WhatsApp board chats have been created during these COVID months, right? The most number of subgroups have been created during these COVID months. And these are all official communications, not fun and games, right? And so why so? Because you need, give that semblance of the fact that everything is running okay, or when I have a problem, I'm going to surface it to you, but I'm going to constantly communicate in a systemic way to you, because I'm not able to see you otherwise. And Zoom calls are fine, but it's not easy to pull everyone in. It's not, if half of the people are on, video off, you don't know if they're paying attention or not. So I think all of that risk gets minimized if you're actually communicating consistently. And the more people you're communicating to, it's just the nature of human behavior. The less likely you are to lie, the less likely you are to keep things hidden, right? And so the pressure, there is moral pressure to be more overt and talk about the problems. Nobody's expecting a perfect right? Almost even our best businesses are path to unicorn companies, other than one or two like an academy. For the first 2-3 months, the business just dropped like this, right? And so it's fine, but if that's not communicated to me, I'll feel very jittery on whether this person will ever tell me the truth, right? And so it was good to see that, and now they're back to 70-80%, and then you're doubly more confident on this person. So I think trust has to be built via some means of communication, right? And I think when the face-to-face is not, we'll find good substitutes, and that's what I think all of us have done in the venture world, at least.
Pallavi, there's actually an interesting question here, which was basically on the lines saying a lot of data for marketing strategies is collected over time, and you fall back on some of, let's say, older trends per se. But in a pandemic time, in a post-pandemic time, you're going to almost is a lot of the data almost irrelevant, because when you're planning ahead, saying for 1 second, sometimes you fall back on how trends would generally work, because you had something to look at. But are you looking at data differently now, especially with your marketing?
Yeah, so I think data is a gold mine. How we use data is critical, and no data is a waste data. So how we are looking at, from a I won't say marketing, but a business perspective, is that from where the data source is coming, right? There are different sources where the data comes from. There are different platforms, and primarily the platforms are, of course, social platforms right now. But you can see through the automation in the systems, if they're integrated, which is specifically your CRM system, right? And because of the technology today, you can look at your CRM system, you can upload it into the DMP, which is your data management platform, And then you can form different personas of your customers and then target the right set of people and follow through the journey, right? So I think it depends if in your infrastructure or in your organization or your IT infrastructure, if your systems talk to you, talk to the entire database which exists within the system. And now because of these technologies, you can track the customer journey, right? It's not just a cookie pool you're collecting, right? So how we are looking at data at this point is there are high indulgence steps customers take, right, over a period of time. There are things like if Varun has gone, I'm just giving a hypothetical example. If Varun has gone on our website and looked at a 3 Series 330i, I hope he buys one point in time. It's the M Sport 330i. I'm not trying to pitch your car, but I'm saying it's a good car. So you
I have a
look at
car
that
from an
and
exact competitors. I'm not going to name them. So I'm like,
oh, we must talk after this call. So and then you've spec'd your car, you spent some time, you looked at the finance calculator, you've really spent if you spend anything between 2 to 3 minutes on our own platforms, we know that this kind of persona of a customer is likely to buy much faster. So we divide our customers over a period of time of brand fans, potential buyers, immediate buyers, right? And then ensuring that we keep nurturing our customers. Even if a customer today who's 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, it's a big brand fan if you're able to give them a great customer experience, right? Which could also mean sending them a nice BMW cap or a keychain or anything it could be, right? So I think data which is collected through our own platforms and looked at through different systems, how we nurture that journey of the customer is dependent on the business and the brand. And that's the paradigm shift, which has happened pre-COVID. Now, post-COVID is that how do we ensure we don't miss any data points where we know the indulgence, because we have to get business back faster. So we need to look at customers who are showing higher indulgence steps towards owning a product, which potentially could be, of course, a car. So that's where I would say that databases is a gold mine. If we can look at data and within teams, I personally feel that within teams, having a data analytics person or a data scientist today is imperative because everybody cannot understand data as much as a person who loves numbers and can look at data coming from different stream and can make sense of it because there's so much data already available, but sometimes you can't make sense of that data. And ensuring that at the leadership level, the data, which is very, very important to make business decisions, is looked at a level which is middle level. How do we use that data? How do we nurture that data? How do we automate that data to then go into a machinery of selling more whatever product that could be, right? And then at the bottom level of the spectrum is, of course, then selling more cars or selling your product, by the end of the day. So I think that's I hope I answered your question. It was a little long.
I think gave a lot of interesting perspectives into the ways to look into it. I think I have time for one more question, and that's actually one which just came in, and that's for you, Karthik. Is that if someone has a desire to have their own startup, can you give insights into how do they come up with the idea for it? I don't know if there's. I think this is a great question to ask you. So yeah.
No, so I think unfortunately I'm not a fan of people, there used to be an era where I don't know, most of you are in the audience are too young. My dad was a serial entrepreneur, and believe it or not, I think he jumped from too many ideas for too little a time because he was not married to the idea in his head, but was sold the idea from the outside world. And in that era, it might sound incredible, but people came with bound project plans for various technology ideas. Like, okay, you set up a plant for a sort of, assembled furniture. You set up a plant for batteries. One of my, now he's become an investor, helped him sell his company. He actually built a 60 crore company like that. Somebody came and sold him a business idea, and he had some spare cash, and he promoted it, raised some more money, raised some debt, and actually built a business. Right? So there's nothing wrong with that entrepreneurship. Right? For most people who do not know what to do, don't want to do a job, want to be in business, want to earn a livelihood, whether it's opening up a kirana store or opening a small chai ka dukan or a bagel shop or a small factory, they're all equivalent forms of entrepreneurship. If you're talking to venture capitalists, we are greedy for like this massive outcomes in crazy speed. It's I can't emphasize this enough. If you touch institutionalized venture capital, you're essentially saying you're willing to build on steroids. You're willing to build in an artificial world. This is not the real world. It's a parallel artificial world where everybody you onboard onto that journey, which is why it took so long for the venture ecosystem to get built, because you needed somebody to pay Flipkart to train all the people that they did, or an Ola to train the people they did. You can't pull someone from Infosys and bring them into the venture world. They'll just collapse under the pressure, right? Into the startup world, because there's so much to be done in such little time. So when you want that, then to the person who asked the question, I forget the name, the mission's got to be so so solidly embedded in you, right? So it's got to be you oozing this idea wherever you go. You go to a family wedding, you're talking this idea. You're going, you're in the bus, you're talking this idea. So you got to live, smell, dream, and this idea. Almost the first question I ask is, what got you to this idea, right? And it's got, and I'm not kidding you. For most people, it's festering in their heads for years. It might have come through a job. It might have come through working in Flipkart. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're sitting in Flipkart, you go there day in, day out for 6 years. And you say, why the hell isn't Flipkart solving for that tier 2, guy in a chawl, right? Yeah. Because they don't care about them. So I want to solve for it. And this is a brand new example from yesterday, literally. I heard this pitch yesterday. It's 2 Flipkart engineers, 1 product guy, 1 business guy, sorry, not engineers, who basically said, Flipkart's never going to solve for that audience. I want to solve for it. And that comes from having worked for 5-6 years inside. So the problem has to obsess you. And we used to say that you have to have a pathological obsession around the problem you want to solve. Not get excited about, maine app bana liya, kitna sundar hai, dekho, right? Whoa, solution hai. That's not the problem. And you're just getting happy about the solution that you're portraying. But actually, the customer says, I don't care about all that. Are you solving my problem? And which is also, by the way, the last point. However strongly people come and pitch us and we fund, inevitably in Blume's journey, 9 out of 10 companies, the products look entirely different after 1 year of giving them the check. How scary is that, right? So you really don't know what you're funding other than that obsession that they want to solve for that last problem. And then you're leaving them to their own to go discover it from the market. And I think that's the joy of venture-backed entrepreneurship. Not easy, not for the faint-hearted, but the only one I have time for, unfortunately. There are millions of entrepreneurs, but I wish I could have all of them. Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. I mean, I think you've both given me at least a bunch of stuff which I have mental notes for, which right after this I'm going to put down and I'm going to channel out there. I'm sorry we couldn't answer a bunch of other questions that were there. We're out of time. But Pallavi, Karthik, both of you, thank you for taking the time out and just giving a lot of insights into how people need to look at businesses and just roles as leaders, roles as founders, and everything around it, and what do you focus on in terms of specializing? What do you focus on to look almost to be future forward in that sense of the word, and kind of look at. So thanks a ton for taking the time out, and thank you to everybody who tuned in today and watched this. Just make sure that if you do have areas that you want to specialize in, stuff that you want to learn, go to the upGrad website. They've got some great programs there on management, data science, technology, and many more other pieces. You should definitely go check that out. And we'll be back here again next Thursday. And till then, that's it from me. And I don't know, too cheesy for me to say stay future forward, but I'm going to say it anyway. Let's stay future forward. And thank you, upGrad and LBB, for this.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for hosting us, Varun. Bye, Pallavi.
Thank you. Thanks, Karthik. Thanks, Varun.
Thanks.